Hello everybody and welcome back to the Dragon's Library. So today I will finally be reviewing The Fourth Wing, a new book by Rebecca Yaros, which came out earlier this year in May. It is the first book in the Empyrean series, with a second installment coming out later this year. And this is the second fantasy series that came out this year and is going to have a sequel in the fall. Well, at least I'm not left on a cliffhanger for multiple years like some authors I could name. I could name those authors, but I won't. Aside from repeating that George R.R. Martin really needs to finish his freaking books. Getting back on topic, The Fourth Wing is a YA fantasy series, and you know what that means. It's a fantasy story with a heavy emphasis on mistrusting adults, and has some sort of love triangle shoved into it. Look, I don't write the rules, I just read the books. So, what's the story? The Fourth Wing centers its plot around the Kingdom of Navari. Navari is a kingdom that made an alliance with the dragons of their land, and as such fields dragon riders as one of the main military branches. Violet Sorrengail was a new recruit for the Navari military who wanted to join the Scribe Quadrant, and spent years of her life studying in libraries. Unfortunately for her, after Violet's father dies, and 6 months before she goes to enlist, her mother, General Lilith Sorrengail, decides she doesn't really care what Violet wants, and orders her to join the Rider Squadron, and if Violet tries to do anything else, her mother will use her considerable authority to literally throw her into dragon training herself. To make matters worse, over half the recruits for the Rider Squadron die every year, and Violet has a sickly constitution on top of spending her whole life studying rather than working out. Forced into dangerous training after only 6 months of preparation compared to the years of preparation her peers had, Violet has to try hard to avoid being killed, both by her peers and by the dragons themselves. So, yeah, it's a pretty standard YA premise. You've got an unlikely protagonist, combating authority figures, a cool plot hook, getting people to read. There's certainly a love triangle. However, despite resembling the default YA template very closely, almost to a T, there's a lot of the story that does elevate above things like The Maze Runner or Divergence. I mean that aside from the fact that this has dragons and is also well written, and as a result is almost automatically better. No shade if you like The Maze Runner, but, well, some shade. The first thing this book does well is world building. Most stories, especially ones set in fictional settings, can struggle with balancing the need to explain the rules of the world and not overloading the reader with exposition. This book takes a simple but effective approach. Set in the first-person perspective, Violet almost never seems to explain just for the sake of explaining. She tends to survive by cunning and trickery, so reading her thought process often explains the rules of her problem, which can tease out bits of the world building over time. In a similar manner, the setting itself never feels the need to sit us down and explain more than the basics, but a skilled reader can figure out a lot from context and offhand statements. The best example, as I can think of off the top of my head, is the religion of Navar. Over the course of the story, we regularly hear characters swear about Malik, who seems to be their underworld god. We don't need to hear someone outright say, Malik is the king of the underworld. But when you hear characters swear about Malik, who seems to be their underworld god, and you hear a death roll, and they say, we commend these souls to Malik, the reader understands. Almost everything we know about the mythology is done this way, from the creation myth to the king and queen of the gods, to how they burn possessions of the dead to release attachment. This makes the world feel natural, because we only know information we deduce from random conversations. Of course, they won't just sit down and read a book that outlines every detail of their world, and they don't just bring up facts everyone knows in conversation. Not often, at least. The only exception to this would be the book of folklore left to Violet by her father, and the way it's used to spark conversation about the venom, humans consumed by corrupted magic drawn from without the help of magical creatures. However, even that book becomes an important plot point. In fact, it's heavily implied the book was left to Violet by her father specifically to point her to that information in particular. But that is me going into my own theories on the true nature of this world in the book. And my thoughts on Violet's father, I'll save it for the spoiler section. This kind of naturalistic world building is very hard to do well, which is what makes it impressive this book does such a good job with it. Next up, we have the characters. This book has a surprisingly large cast of secondary and supporting characters, so I'm only going to go over the really big ones here. Warning, some of these characters will spoil a surprise, but that spoiler is already hinted at on the cover of the freaking book. and I called it about one-fourth of the way in, plus it's too important to the story to ignore. Alright, you have been warned. First up, we have Violet Soaringale. Violet is an interesting character, partially due to her conflicting character traits. She loves knowledge and study, but despite loathing killing, is perfectly willing to be fucking ruthless when it comes to defending herself and those she cares for. Throughout the books, she is regularly called the smartest member of any group she's in, and she actually does earn that title, unlike a lot of other smart characters. This is balanced in the same way that many smart characters are, with weak physical stats. Violet's mom got sick while carrying her, and as a result, Violet's hair turns silver at the tips, and she injures way too easily. She makes up for this with speed and cunning. In early sparring matches, she starts poisoning her opponents so none of them will try to casually off her, since the teachers mostly won't stop someone from killing a recruit they deem weak. It's a pretty good strategy that requires a lot of planning. Once she bonds with both Tyrn and Adarna, she begins to develop magic, and although her magic powers are ridiculously powerful, one is practically a once-per-month use, and the other is so wild she can barely aim it. Basically, the story forces her to adapt, and she has a remarkable arc when it comes to developing these powers and still getting used to the fact that she's not a powerhouse on her own. At first, Violet assumes she'll be dead within a few weeks, but clings to her friend Dane for advice and support, before eventually forming an unlikely bond with Xaden. I'll talk about that in the next section, actually later down in this section when we go over those two characters, but suffice to say, I really like the way the characters' core traits remain the same, and the relationships fail naturally due to things you probably could have pointed out early on. Tyrn, or Ternanak, is the first dragon Violet bonds with, and is sort of her exact opposite in many ways. A massive black-tailed mace dragon, who is widely considered one of the highest ranked and dangerous dragons. Tyrn is a grumpy, old dragon who quickly becomes protective of his rider, in his own way. He latches onto Violet not based on strength like others, but her kindness and cunning. This is amplified when we learn he not only is he powerful, but so old the backlash from losing another rider will likely kill him too. He still chooses Violet though, which comes as a massive shock to the rest of the riders and dragons. Especially Xaden, who is bonded to Tyrn's mate, and as such will have to spend the rest of his career tethered to Violet due to their mating bond. Through his bond with Violet, he grants her the ability to call down lightning strikes, which is freaking awesome. He also has a daughter named Andarna. Andarna is the second dragon who bonds with Violet in a massive surprise. Originally known as the Golden Feather Dragon, dragons that are, never seen fighting, Andarna is actually revealed, at least to the handful of humans who are in the know due to the dragon bond, to be the daughter of Tyrn and Sigale. They don't want humans to know all their secrets, so they keep it a secret that feather-tailed dragons are actually just baby dragons. And Sigale is Xaden's dragon. After Violet defends her from some violent assholes who want to kill the useless pacifist, Andarna quickly latches onto her and becomes her second bonded dragon during the naming ceremony, where the dragons give their name for the record to confirm they're actually bonded. It causes a huge scene, though it quickly becomes clear to many who know Feathertails are adolescents that Tyrn is partially there for Andarna's protection, and Andarna was the one who latched onto Violet first, most likely. Although she is too young to grant a sigil, or a unique magical power, she can briefly channel magic through Violet to allow her to stop time in brief bursts. Now this implies that in a few years, once Andarna can do this safely and Violet has both those powers at her disposal, Violet will be one of the most powerful riders in the country, if not the most powerful. It can also nearly kill Andarna at this stage in her development, which makes it something to keep a secret so the government doesn't make her abuse it and accidentally kill her friend, and also because it could hurt Andarna, so they use it as a last resort option. Then we have the two love interests, Dane and Xaden. Dane is the classic childhood friend. Despite being a mind reader, which is apparently a death sentence because conspiracy, his power is touch activated, so the higher-ups let him live because it's controllable. They can control who he touches, so they can just use him. At first, he starts out as Violet's main ally, helping her with information, keeping an eye on her, defending her from bullies. He tries to arrange for her to be sent back to another quadrant, but Violet can't accept because her mother will just assign her back to the Dragon Riders. She can't deal with a general going after her for 3 straight years. While he's kind at first, he becomes more overbearing with time, even though he never really changes that much. After a kiss with him and Violet makes Violet realize he's just a friend, he realizes he actually does like her, and she catches on to that and is a little awkward about it. But he doesn't want to be in a relationship because second years are technically commanding officers, first years, and that's taboo. Dane is very loyal to the country and to the rules, which brings him into increasing conflict with Violet, who's willing to bend and even break rules to survive. A great example of this is the mid-year test, where students must complete a dangerous obstacle course or die trying. Violet bends one rule by using a rope meant for catching yourself if you fall as leverage to climb up something she couldn't climb the correct way. This technically results in a worse time because of the penalty of 30 seconds, but she wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise anyway, so that's why she took the penalty. Then she uses the knife to finish the last obstacle when she wasn't allowed to bring outside tools. She uses an odd interpretation of the rules of the school where anything they bring in with them is technically all they have for those next few years, and is considered an extension of their body. While Violet technically broke the rules, at the same time, she also didn't, because her knife is considered a extension of her, like her hand. So while her technicality gets approved and is eventually deemed valid, it bent and to most even broke the very important, rite passage rules they have for becoming a dragon rider. It's seen as a weak and cowardly thing, which results in Dane not defending her and even scolding her later in private. Which, I add, she did so she didn't die. This natural divide between their beliefs makes for a believable deterioration of their relationship. Which leads us into Xaden, who's the son of the leader of a rebellion that got put down years prior. Violet's mom personally executed a lot of them, including their leader, and then her dragon branded them with a magic mark, which I actually have a conspiracy about that, but we'll get to that in the spoiler section where I talk about my theories. This is then used to identify the children and force them into dragon rider training. This is basically in the hopes they can just die without officially ordering the execution of children. It's basically a death sentence, but a lot of them manage to do well, and Xaden manages to not only survive, but thrive, despite being introduced as an antagonist and threatening to kill Violet. He doesn't seem to really want to, not to say he wouldn't to protect those he loves, but he reveals himself to be similar to Violet, willing to break or even bend the rules to survive, and protect his fellow marked riders. After being bound to Violet through each other's dragons, he gets annoyed that he has to protect her in order to not die as a result of the cascading ripples that Tyrion's death would cause. So, if she dies, then Tyrion dies, then Sigale dies, and then he would die, because a dragon can survive without a rider, but a rider can no longer survive without a dragon. But unlike Dane, he doesn't actually take it easy on her, and even respects Violet for her tenacity, drive, and intelligence. As she grows more confident, Dane's actions go from protective to demeaning, and Xaden becomes one of the first people to trust and eventually respect her for using her natural talents to her advantage. He sees that she's not just someone trying to survive, but she's someone who's taking the best of a bad situation and doing what she can with it. Especially once he realizes her mom forced her into this, he starts seeing the parallels between them. Two people forced into a role they didn't want and forced to not only survive but thrive due to the pressures of who their parents are. So that is the love triangle. I know, I was shocked by how well it was written. Now, I'm not a romance person, I've said this before in previous books, but I can deal with it and even like it so long as it doesn't fuck up the story. Unlike many dumber YA books, cough, Hunger Games, I'm not being subtle, I don't need to, they weren't, the main character only briefly entertains the status quo of this trope. Violet realizes early on that Dane was just a friend, and grows increasingly tired of his shit. And although Xaden and her have a romantic relationship by the final few chapters, it develops naturally, and there is an asterisk on that final few chapters thing. You'll see. The ending actually put some stress on that relationship in a really interesting way, but the ending was really good to begin with. Now, before we go into the conclusion, I want to discuss the setting. Navari is a fascinating world that reminds me a lot of both Game of Thrones and, oddly, Fullmetal Alchemist. The country is a monarchy and has an immense emphasis on a military power structure, which seems to hold much of the day-to-day authority. Dragon riders in particular are so valuable and important to the defense and wards that dragons are legally allowed to kill anyone who annoys them. Basically, you become a dragon rider and live your whole life in battle. You get magic and the best of everything, but you're treated like a military dog and you're probably gonna die young. I actually like that the government and the dragons are almost treated like diplomatic allies, rather than a whole part of the single human dragon government. That dragons even have their own council and everything. The lethal, cutthroat, military, political structure makes me think a lot of Game of Thrones, but oddly enough, FMA similarities are much more striking. A military authority not being trustworthy? Check. Magic with darkened locations? Check. Suppression information with the characters need that some of them discover? Check. Circle-shaped country? Weird, but check. The biggest problem I have with the setting is that we only get to see a small slice of it. 90% of the book is set at the Dragon Academy, and we only really start learning about the other country they're in war with near the very end, where all like the twists come in. Now, there is one big twist in the final, actually a lot of big twists, not just one, which reveals a wider conspiracy, the reason for the conflict in the neighboring nation of Griffin Riders, and the true nature of Navari's wars. But I'm going to save that for the spoiler section because it's a lot and it's really, really spoilery. So let's move on to the conclusion. In conclusion, The Fourth Wing is an excellent example of YA fantasy. It doesn't avoid the common trappings of YA books, but it does execute them in a very well done manner. The fantasy elements are on point, characters are engaging, and I really enjoy a YA protagonist who can make up their own damn mind and be decisive. The world Yaros has created is also interesting, and I love that she lets the reader piece things together through small bits and pieces of information. Plus, it's a dragon book, and dragons are inherently awesome. It really shouldn't be a surprise, then, that this gets a 10 out of 10 for me. Definitely read this before the next book comes out. Okay, and with that said and done, we're going to go ahead and move on to the spoiler section. Be warned, there are major spoilers for the last few chapters of this book, and for some of the plot reveals and things I've been hinting at in the review. If you don't want spoilers, well, you can probably just stop watching, but if you really want to see what I'm up to next, there's going to be a timestamp on screen about now, if I remember to do it. If not, you can probably just find it by scrolling down the video. Anyway, let's get into it. So, the big spoiler that's like the big reveal that happens at the end of the book is that A, the rebellion was started because the mythological creatures of folklore, the Venin, are actually real. They're humans who tried to draw magic without drawing it through either a griffin or a dragon. That's part of the creation myth. Is that there are three brothers. The oldest got a dragon, the youngest got a griffin, and they both got magic powers. The third youngest was jealous, and he tried to draw magic straight from the world, and it corrupted him and turned him into sort of like a vampire. Venin draw magic from the world, leaving it barren in life, which is like half of the map. You look on screen, it might have an image of the world map. There's like this whole barren ashen area because Venin have like sucked it dry. And the rebellion was started because they knew and wanted to fight back against the Venin, because the reason the Griffin Riders are attacking their kingdom is because they need the material that the Dragon Riders use to build the wards, because it's also the only thing that can hurt them kill the Venin. If you try and hurt or kill them normally, they'll just heal back from it or won't even be affected by it. If you're lucky, they might get hurt, but it'll just heal. So, as a result, the Griffins are constantly trying to steal the material the wards are built from, which weaken the wards, which then the dragons have conflicts with, and then people die on both sides, and then the Venin just keep raiding them on the other side. And in addition to that, there's something going on with the dragon population not getting more, and the wards beginning to fail because people are stealing the stone, and the rebellion relic children, those with the, sigil or whatever, the magic mark, have been secretly working with the Griffin Rider, supplying them with the material covertly to continue on their parents' works. Their parents were decried as like insane and crazy. I will get into more crazy Davis theories in a little bit, because I actually have some theories about where the next book is going. I want to kind of record these so I can see either I told you so or oops, I was wrong. Anyhow, with the Venin, it basically turns out that the folklore has, like, one of the big signs early on is that this book of folklore, which, aside from mentioning the Venin, which a lot of people seem to not really have heard about, despite being kind of common folklore in some of the more rural parts of the country, is actually a book that's not found in the archives, which Violet immediately realizes that means it's either a unique copy, which is really unlikely because her father had it and he was a scribe, he would have transcribed it, or it's a forbidden book, the kind of things that aren't allowed for the public to have access to. But she doesn't get why this weird random bit of, historical folklore is for some reason a forbidden tome. Anyhow, moving on from there, we get to the main thing, which is essentially that when Xaden, during the war games for the graduating class and for graduating for your year, Xaden and Violet and his team, which are all rebellion marked, are sent over to this fort, but when they arrive, they find it empty. Turns out that nearby, Xaden and the others were supposed to be delivering a shipment shortly before all this got started. However, when they arrive at the fort, it's all empty. Turns out, at some point, the others figured out what was happening. And as a result, they haven't been actually executed yet, because Xaden is a very powerful rider, and the Segale Terran bond means that he would also take down Violet, who is also extremely valuable. 2 riders, 2 dragons, 2 powers. She's General Sword and Guards Starter. So, since they haven't gotten full confirmation that would probably hold up in court that they're guilty, they give them a choice. they've been given orders to immediately move on to this new territory. However, the superiors also know those Griffin Riders they were delivering the stuff to, by now Violet's found out and she's really pissed, are also about to have to fight a group of Venin who are about to burn a nearby town just across the border. Or technically they're outside the border at this point, but just a little ways away. So in order to prove their loyalty, they have to leave a town to die, including all the Griffin Riders they just gave a bunch of very valuable material to. At this point, Violet has also recognized the material as the material of a dagger in her mother's office, which means her mom knew about all of this. And given the fact that the folklore book was owned by her dad likely figured it out too at some point before he died. I have a conspiracy theory about this that goes two ways, and I will talk about it in just a second. Anyway, they go ahead and fight off the Venin, and Violet manages to get lucky, kill a few of them, and stop the others by striking down their wyverns, which are basically, they're sort of like the inverse of the Dragon Rider thing. Instead of like bonding with a dragon, they create the wyvern, but it's an inverse bond where sort of like the rider's more important than the dragon, as opposed to the dragon rider duo where the dragon's usually more dominant. And the Venin get weakened and hurt by this, so they managed to fend them off, just barely. But it also means they're kind of, traitors now-ish. It's a little unclear. However, it turns out the city, one of the hearts of the rebellion, is the city that was like the heart of the rebellion is still actually active, and they bring Violet there because she's dying and they need some medical attention. And it turns out Violet's brother, who was believed to have died in the rebellion by Xaden's own father, is alive, which I kind of called halfway through. It's like, we need to bring him to him. He's a healer. I'm like, oh, the rebellion was all bullshit. Her brother probably figured it out as a healer, and I called it right before it happened. I'm loving that. Her brother is there, and she's like, yep, Violet, welcome to the rebellion now, and the book ends. Now, there are a few things about this that I really want to talk about. First up, to give you information before I go into my conspiracy theory, there is a relic, which is this magical mark that was given by General Sorengil's dragon. And at first, it's like this horrible, disgraceful mark. Granted, but it's weird because all the other sigils are good things. They're a sign of the bond between a dragon and rider. They're the source of the power and the source of the magic and all that. But this mark essentially says your father and or mother was a traitor, and you're destined to be a part of the Rider Squadron or die trying. So, However, it's revealed that one of the reasons for a really weird rule that Xaden's constantly been subverting, and Violet found out about early on before she was friends with him, but let go because it was harmless. There's a rule that says that no more than three or more rebellion kids cannot be together in one place at a time, or will be treated as a traitorous meeting, like an act of sedition. Basically, you can't have more than 3 of these people in one place at the same time. And the reason for that is actually really cool, because basically there's this guy who's above General Sorge, who's the head of all the dragon forces. He's bonded to the only other black club-tailed dragon, who are like the top tier. And his power is really OP. He can actually see the outcome of battles beforehand. It's implied he probably has some limitations, but to a certain extent, he can see the future, which makes it really easy to keep tabs on rebellion users. Except, for some really weird reason that even Xaden doesn't entirely know, it's not actually a curse. The mark. He even says, I thought it was a curse until I figured it out. It turns out if more than 3 of them are in one place, or 3, I forget, it was either 3 or 3 or more. It's either more than 3 or 3 or more. If enough of them are together, though, he can't see what's happening there. Basically, anything that happens between a meeting of that many people, he's completely blind to it. Now, this is all a lot, but we know a few things. First off, General Sorengil knows about the Viren. She clearly is high enough rank for it. There's something fishy going on with her son. I don't think her oldest daughter knows, Violet's older sister. She's been reinforcing the barriers and stuff like that, but I don't think she knows what's going on based on what we talked with her. I could be wrong, but we probably don't. Her brother clearly figured out what was going on and didn't like it. Her father clearly knew, even though he shouldn't because he's just a scribe. And the scribes have been, the older scribes intentionally got rid of this so the younger ones wouldn't figure it out to begin with. And we also know that General Sorengil's dragon gave the rebellion kids a mark that seems to protect them from the person who would most likely to silence them. Because it's protection from his future sight ability. That's not something you give to people who you hate. Combine that with the fact of the somewhat mysterious death of Violet's father, and the way General Sorengil forced her to become a rider. I have a theory. A book theory. My theory is, and I could be completely wrong about this, but I think that at some point General Sorrengail and her husband became aware of this. Maybe they did separately, maybe they happened before or after, whatever. Maybe it was during the rebellion. I don't know. Given the fact, though, that the father seemed to have been reading this book of folklore to Violet for most of her life, I would place it probably around the time Violet was either born or shortly before. In fact, Violet's hair being silver and her weak constitution might have even been the result of a venom attack against General Sorrengail. Her father might have figured out what they were from the book of folklore while trying to help. I think that when the rebellion happened, General Sorrengail was sympathetic but still loyal to her country, along with the father. However, when they found out the exact details of everything, they got very suspicious but couldn't do anything in their own positions, at least. At least not openly. They either allowed their son to defect, or the father allowed it, or the son did it on his own, because the general seemed very certain he was dead. Not to traitor. Like, if he turned traitor and she was really as ruthless as she said, I don't think she would have let him live. I think what happened was that General Sorrengail started pushing for change inside the organization with those who knew about venom. But they figured out her father knew, or her husband knew, and they were getting a little too close to some things they would rather keep very, very secret for the populace. So they had her husband silent, Violet's father silenced. And as a result, General Sorrengail got spooked, because her husband was just a scribe. You can just off him in a library and claim he died from some sickness or whatever, and just cover it up. But if her daughter went to the scribes, she has that book of folklore, she will not let this rest, she'll figure it out again. So I think the mother was actually scared that Violet would figure it out, which is why she forced her into the Rider Squadron. Forcing her to infantry or one of the other branches would not work out well, but she forces her into the Rider Squadron. It makes sense. Like, I'm a Dragon Rider, I want you to be one. It's a good reason to get her out of the scribes where she won't learn this information that got her killed. I also think that's why the older sister doesn't know either. Because the older sister's only like a year or two older. She just graduated recently. So it makes sense that the older sister would also be kept in the dark like Violet. But she was easy. She wanted to be a rider. She's a barrier user. She can help reinforce wards. So she just goes there and reinforces the ward. She doesn't actually get involved in all this shit. She never leaves and because of her power, she's never going to leave the borders of the nation because she's too valuable. So she'll never find out the truth about the venom. However, when Violet was bonded to two dragons, and one of them was a black clubtail, I think General Sorrengail might have seen an opportunity to depose the current leadership, because the other leader is a black clubtail as well, and there's some expectation that Xaden and Violet would be some of the best new recruits of their generation, if not the entire current, like all of them. Like in a few years, the two of them tag teaming together could basically take down anyone, and could easily get promoted high enough up to do her agenda. That's probably why she was so happy with Violet's stuff recently, and why she was also trying to keep her distance. She didn't want to give away that she was plotting this. However, Dane was always reporting to someone else, and I think that the leadership figured out Violet knew and assumed it was a similar situation, so that's why they gave the test. It wasn't even, I think if it was really just about the rebellion kids, they would just flat out killed them. Even knowing how powerful Xaden is, but Violet got wrapped up in that. Hell, that might have been even why General Sorrengail was pleased, because you can't just casually off the child of a high-ranking general like her, especially now she's like the only dragon rider to have ever bonded to two dragons. It's too historically important. It'd be very hard to make her quietly disappear. Xaden, everybody wanted to die anyway. He was just a really cool shadow user they really thought they could get use out of. And they probably thought he didn't know anything. So my guess is that General Sorrengail is either A, partially responsible for her husband's demise, and that she was working with them, and the husband is the one responsible for all the stuff I'm talking about, and that she moved her daughter there because she didn't want her to get in the same mess that caused her to kill her husband, or, more likely, General Sorrengail is actually on our side, and she is working from within to try and help the rebellion. Like, why else would she leave that dagger on her desk? That's at least my theory. Basically, I know for a fact that the dad was wrapped in this lighter conspiracy. It's very clear at this point. But I think the mom is either trying to keep Violet out of the way of the stuff so she doesn't get killed despite the way she treats her, or she's trying to protect her while she fights against the corruption inside their own government. One of the two. And I genuinely think it might be the second one. especially given Violet's hair and the fact that seems to imply that they were drained or something. I think it implies that General Sorngill fought a Venin or encountered something like that around the time Violet was born. It's just a theory, but it is one I think is worth talking about. So with my crazy conspiracy theory out of the way now, let's go into any other spoilers in this book. There isn't really a ton more to say, because I talked about all the main things. Venin are real, the Griffin Riders and the other nation are kind of good guys. You shouldn't just let them die. I do kind of like the way they worked with the whole history thing. Basically just remove a few books and wait a few generations, and eventually things just kind of fade to memory. It's actually pretty interesting conspiracy as to go for ancient, civilizations like this. All in all, that's basically it. I just wanted to talk about my weird conspiracy theory, really. So, yeah. Moving on from there, we have our announcements. I am sorry that it has taken so long to get this video up. I have no idea when this is actually going up. I'm recording this on, Monday. No, Sunday. I'm still recording this on Sunday. This part I'm recording on Monday because I had to re-edit a few things. I had it recorded originally on Friday, but then I deleted and re-recorded it because I didn't like it. And it's been a lot. Anyhow, this will be going up once I get everything fully edited, but it's a long video, so we'll see how that goes. In addition, I do have some other things that are coming down the pipeline soon. I'm probably going to do a short review for Final Fantasy XVI. Mostly because I don't think I can stand a full review of it, and I'm probably not going to finish the game, but I do want to say some things about it, so we'll let that go. Next up on my list is a review of the Dragon Prince Season 5. Look out for that. And I'm still undecided of whether or not I'm going to go see that Haunted Mansion movie from Disney. It looks like it could be fun, so I might go see that. So, yeah. Moving on to the end card, we have a subscribe orb. Click on it, go to my channel, subscribe. Up here is the playlist of everything from this year. There's a video YouTube recommends. Click on either of those. You guys have been great, seriously. Thank you for sticking around this long. And I will see you next time. Bye!